He was a strong, immense gorilla with deep-set eyes that had seen more pain than anyone could bear. But somehow, it went out. The animal that was once a symbol of strength and confidence was now about to be defeated by something more invisible than any pathogen: loneliness. He lost his shine, his will to live, and with it, hope seemed to disappear. But just as the solution seemed clear to everyone, a woman, with silent strength and overwhelming courage, arrived on the scene. Camila Marquez did not believe in conventional medicine. She knew that the true medicine was the bond that only the human heart could heal. She had just 5 days to save Tito, a gorilla who seemed lost, but who deep down still had something more to offer: the desire to be heard, to be loved. When Camila enters a space surrounded by protocols, by numbers and reports that do not know how to recognize what cannot be measured, she brings with her the only thing that scientists cannot understand: hope. But what she didn't know, and perhaps the mission would be more difficult than she imagined, was that in the midst of this fight for Tito's life, she would also find herself faced with a dilemma that would touch her own heart in ways she never expected. Tito was more than a gorilla to Camila. He was the reason for her mornings, for her journey as a caregiver and friend. When she met him, he was just a traumatized puppy, taken from a circus, marked by pain and distrust. She was his savior, his anchor. Together, they learned to trust each other, to create a connection that no human being could imagine. But that was years ago. Now he was old, tired, and the place that was his refuge, the sanctuary he called home, was about to become his final prison. Euthanasia was a word that hung over him like a shadow, waiting for the right moment to descend upon his fate. Camila wasn't ready to accept it. She knew Tito was suffering, but his suffering wasn't physical, it was emotional, and something told him that he wasn't just mourning his forever companion, Esmeralda. He was mourning everything he had lost: his confidence, his joy in life. She looked at that strong and immense animal and saw in him not the defeated creature that others saw, but a soul that still had something to teach. With only 5 days to save Tito, Camila knew the battle would be hard. But she couldn't accept that her friend, her brother, would be ripped from her life without giving everything she could to help him. She would fight with what she knew: the power of bond, of memory, of emotion that transcends numbers and protocols. His mission was simple: rescue Tito from the abyss of loneliness and help him find his way back to life. But the biggest question was, could I do it? And what would she have to sacrifice to do so? The smell of the environment was different. It was dense, heavy, with a touch of disinfectant that only those who have been to a hospital or veterinary clinic could identify. But it wasn't the smell that bothered Camila. It was silence, the silence that enveloped the room where Tito was. He didn't move. He didn't react. Camila entered the monitoring room and went to the glass window that separated the inside of Tito's cage. She saw the gorilla lying on the ground in a dark corner. His eyes were closed, and his posture was not that of a strong and imposing animal, but of a being that had lost all will to fight. She felt a tightness in her chest. It was a mixture of pain, frustration, and helplessness. All the clinical data that had been analyzed indicated that Tito was in an irreversible state. His numbers were clear. The gorilla was in a deep state of mourning. Tito's behavior was not just the result of a physical loss, but an emotional one. It was going out little by little, like a flame that no longer has the fuel to keep it burning. Camila knew that the technical diagnosis was real. She was not foolish, but her instincts did not allow her to accept such a cold sentence. She looked at the computer, where there were graphs and reports that indicated the seriousness of the situation. But she didn't see numbers there. She saw Tito's face, his face marked by the scars of a difficult past, but also by the trust he had placed in her. How could I let him go now? How could she allow the system to win where she knew there was still a ray of hope? She took a deep breath and began walking to the door that led to Tito's enclosure. The pressure on his shoulders increased with each step. She knew that most of her colleagues, including Dr. Soto, were ready to accept the decision to euthanize. But she doesn't. Not without trying something, without at least fighting to rescue what was lost, but which she believed was possible to save. As she entered the cubicle, the smell that had previously bothered her now seemed more familiar, like a reminder that she had been there so many times with Tito. But this time, it was different. It was a scene of despair, of something that was lost along the way. Camilla approached Tito slowly, without rushing, as if she were in a minefield, aware of every movement she would make. She knew Tito was in a deep state of apathy, but still, he was unpredictable. No one knew how he would react to their presence. She crouched down next to him, letting the space between them shrink. He didn't look at her. Camilla sighed and began to speak, her voice low and soft. "Hi, Tito. Remember me?" Her voice was filled with a feeling she couldn't hide. It was longing, it was love. It was all she could give at that moment, but he didn't react. There was no movement, there was no response. Camilla looked at the bucket of tennis pellets that had been placed there, as if it were an attempt to revive something that he no longer seemed to want. Those pellets had been his companions for so many moments. It was when they played. It was when he showed a little of his energy, a little of his essence. But now the pellets were just lying in the corner. She looked at them and somehow felt like that was the key to everything. She took one of the pellets, the most worn one, and began to roll it with her hand without haste, without any intention other than to make the familiar sound that used to enchant him. Expectation was in the air, heavy. Tito still wasn't looking at her. But, little by little, the sound of the ball rolling on the floor broke the silence. She felt the small movement in the air, as if the tension was dissipating. She didn't expect an immediate response, but something inside her believed that Tito was still listening to her. She rolled the ball toward him slowly and waited. The seconds passed like minutes, but finally Tito moved his hand, hesitantly. He caught the ball. It was the first sign she needed. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Tito was starting to react. He was still there, still able to feel. Camilla stood up and, with a shy smile, said, "I knew you were still there, big guy." But the work of rescuing Tito was just beginning. Camilla knew that the fight was more internal than physical. She wasn't just rescuing Tito from a space of sadness and loneliness. She was reclaiming her own heart, her own faith in the possibility that human bonds, deep connections, can heal what science cannot. Now she had 5 days to prove that love and bonding can be more powerful than any diagnosis. The silence in that monitoring room was deafening. Camilla was back at her post watching through the glass. Tito had caught the ball. But what did this really mean? She knew she was still far from any kind of victory. It was just the first step, a sign that maybe, just maybe, he still had something left in him to fight for. Camilla sat down, but physical and emotional fatigue was starting to take its toll. She had spent the night awake, her eyes burning with sleep and her mind spinning endlessly. But she couldn't rest. Not yet. The clock was against her, and the minutes seemed to drag by in an agonizing fashion. She knew the deadline was running out. She had 5 days to save Tito from a fate he did not deserve, and she knew that every hour counted. "Camilla," Ricardo Soto's voice came over the intercom. He was on the other side of the glass wall, watching how she interacted with Tito. He didn't say anything, but his presence was a constant reminder that options were limited. He was expecting her to fail, but he also seemed to be waiting for a miracle. She ignored the intercom. What he thought didn't matter now. What mattered was Tito. It wasn't a question of protocol or numbers. It was about giving him a chance to connect again, to live, to come back to life. Camilla looked at the gorilla who was now sitting in the opposite corner. He still hadn't shown any more signs of life, but she knew something was happening. The small gestures, the way he lifted his head every now and then, the lightness in his breathing, all indicated that he was reacting to his present. Something was awakening in him. Maybe it wasn't enough to get him out of his deep sadness, but it was a start. She got up and went to the door. At that moment, the young technician who was at the monitoring post entered, bringing what Camilla had asked for. Tito's food. It was a mixture that she had made herself, something simple and that he used to love. Oatmeal with molasses and a little fruit was Tito's favorite recipe. She picked up the bowl and placed it on the floor, a few feet away from Tito. "Hey, Tito," she said softly, with the same tenderness she always used. "Here's your food, big guy." She stood, watching the gorilla, waiting for his reaction. The tension in the room was palpable. Tito's every move was analyzed, as if it were the key to the solution. But instead of approaching the bowl, he just stood there, looking at Camilla with empty eyes. He seemed so distant, as if he was unable to react. But she didn't give up. She knew he had the potential for more. Camilla started to speak, not about food or protocols. He began to talk about their past, about the moments they had shared. "Remember when you used to chase the balls? Remember how we used to be here throwing the ball and laughing together?" She smiled when she remembered. "I remember every moment. And you, Tito? Do you remember?" The gorilla didn't move, but the once heavy silence now seemed more receptive. Camilla crouched down, putting herself at Tito's level, and continued. "I know you miss Esmeralda. I know, Tito. But you're not alone. I'm still here. I'm going to stay here until you remember how to play again, until you remember how to live." The room seemed calmer now. The gorilla still didn't move, but there was something in its eyes, something Camilla hadn't seen before. A small spark of recognition. She knew this was enough. He was listening somehow. Maybe the pain wasn't as deep as it seemed. Maybe, just maybe, he was just waiting for someone to see what he was going through. She took a step back and looked at the technician. "I need you to give me time with him, just for today, just for another hour." The coach hesitated, but Camilla knew she had something important to say. That moment was crucial. He nodded and left the room, leaving Camilla alone with Tito. The woman sat down on the floor again, right in front of Tito. She knew he needed time, but she also knew he didn't want to be forced. So instead of trying to pressure him, she just talked more. She talked about the things he liked, about how the two of them had been a team, about how Tito had taught her to be more patient, more careful. She didn't just talk to him. She spoke to herself too, because that was an affirmation that she was willing to fight for him until the end. Little by little, the gorilla began to move. He stood up with difficulty, still weak, but this time with a slight movement. He looked at the bowl of food, but before taking a step towards it, he stopped and stared at Camilla for a moment. It was as if he was trying to understand if she was truly there to help him, or if she too would abandon him, like everyone else before her. And it was in that look that Camilla found the answer. The bond was there. He didn't need anything more than that. He just needed time, and Camilla was willing to give it. Have you ever felt lost in the midst of a challenge so big that there seemed to be no hope left? I know exactly what this is, and I also know that sometimes what we need most is a simple gesture of love and trust to find our way again. Like Tito, we too have our own challenges, but like him, we can find the strength to move forward. If you were moved by this story, share your ideas in the comments. I want to know what you think about the bond between Camilla and Tito. Have you ever experienced something similar? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow this journey. I want to keep sharing stories like this with you, stories that remind us that even in the most difficult times, there is always room for hope. You are not alone. I know you've been along this journey, and I want to know, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to finding healing and connection? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now. We're just getting started, and I want you to be here to see what comes next. Don't forget to interact, because your voice is important here. The third day of Camilla's fight was starting to show small signs of progress. Tito, although still very weak, had approached the food bowl the previous morning. Camilla knew this was just a start, but the fact that he drank the mango and electrolyte mixture was a significant step forward. He was not cured, nor free from his sadness, but at least he was reacting. Camilla continued to stay by his side day after day, doing what no one else knew how to do. She talked about the past, about the good memories, about the moments they had shared. She spoke as if she were telling a story, in a silent attempt to revive something that was lost in Tito. And somehow, he listened. It was as if he was slowly coming back to life, but in a very different way than she had imagined. On the morning of the fourth day, when Camilla entered Tito's enclosure, she noticed something different. He was standing, not as strong as before, but still standing. His eyes were focused on her, and although he was still weak, there was something in his gaze that said he was no longer lost. He was remembering. He was beginning to understand again that she was there, by his side. "Good morning, Tito," said Camilla with a light smile. She knew he wasn't fully healed, but the mere fact that he was standing was already a great victory. He didn't move, but his eyes glowed more brightly. She continued to speak softly. "I knew you could do it, big guy." She walked over and picked up a tennis ball, rolling it lightly towards him with the same gesture as always. Tito looked at the ball and, to Camilla's surprise, he took a step towards her. It was not a run, nor an agile movement. It was a slow movement, as if the weight of his own pain was still too much for him, but he was trying hard. He caught the ball with his hand, and his breathing quickened a little, as if he had taken a step beyond his own pain. Camilla smiled, once again feeling the weight of victory. As she watched Tito, she remembered all the times he had made her smile, all the moments of fun and joy. They had a history that could not be erased by numbers or science. They had something deeper, something that was beyond the physical, beyond reason. But time was running out, and Camilla knew she couldn't stay there forever. The plan she had come up with was risky, and the numbers kept pushing her towards the side of science, towards the side of logic. She knew everyone was watching, but the only thing that mattered at that moment was Tito, the silverback gorilla that she had promised not to abandon. "I know you still have a lot left inside you," Camilla said, her voice now soft but firm. "I'm here, Tito, and I'm going to stay here until you remember how to feel safe again." It was a promise. She was doing something no one else had the courage to do. She was not just fighting the numbers and the reports, but the very logic that said all was lost. She believed in something more, something that could not be explained, but that could be seen in Tito's eyes. Their connection was stronger than anything. The intercom chirped, interrupting his thoughts. It was Ricardo Soto, with his usual tone of controlled coolness. "Camilla, we have to talk," he said, his voice low but with an urgency she couldn't ignore. "You know we're running out of time. We can't keep this up. We need a real solution." Camilla closed her eyes for a moment. She knew he was right, but the truth was she didn't know what a real solution was at that moment. For her, the solution was there, in front of Tito. It was in the trust that she and the gorilla had rebuilt, and in the bond that she believed could heal him. "I know what you're saying, Ricardo," Camilla replied, her voice calm but determined. "But I'm not going to give up on him now. Tito is not lost. He is recovering. He just needs more time. More than numbers, he needs someone who believes in him, and I believe in him." Ricardo sighed on the other side of the intercom. He knew the conversation wasn't going where he expected, but he also knew that Camilla had a power he couldn't understand. She was so invested in that gorilla that her words seemed to have a greater effect than any protocol. "Camilla, you're messing with the security of the entire sanctuary," he said, trying to remain calm. "You can't stay here indefinitely. We need results." Camilla knew he was right, but her mind was fixed on Tito. He was there in front of her, showing signs of life, albeit slow. She couldn't just abandon him now when he was finally starting to show signs that the cure wasn't just in the hands of scientists, but in the relationship they had shared for so long. She looked at Tito, who was standing now, his eyes fixed on her. She wouldn't need much more to know he was starting to believe it. They had time, and she was willing to give everything she had to make sure he had the chance to heal. The fifth and final day arrived, the decisive day. Camilla looked at the clock, feeling the weight of pressure on her shoulders. It was now or never. She was tired, but not willing to give up. The last few days had been a roller coaster of emotions, of small advances and setbacks. But one thing was clear. Tito was reacting to something deeper, something that numbers and protocols could not measure. She entered Tito's enclosure with a heavy heart, knowing that her time there was coming to an end. He was more attentive, more present. His eyes were no longer so empty, and for the first time in many days he looked at her differently. Camilla crouched down next to him, her voice soft and full of affection. "I warned you, Tito. I knew you were strong." She smiled, feeling a tear threatening to fall, but she held it tightly. "I knew there was still something in you that could bring us back. We are not alone in this. We never have been. Tito didn't respond verbally, but his eyes shone with an intensity that said it all. He stood up with a firmer, more confident movement and took a step towards her. Camilla opened her arms, but didn't expect more than he could give. She already knew that no matter what happened, she had made a difference. She had shown him and everyone around her that there was more at stake than just following rules. The phone rang. It was Ricardo Soto. He was waiting for the final decision. Camilla took a deep breath, looked at Tito one last time and replied firmly, "Tito will live. He will recover because the connection we have cannot be measured in numbers." She hung up the phone, turned to Tito and said, "You're going to live, my friend, and I'll be here until you feel ready." With a sincere smile, she walked away. Tito, with renewed confidence, looked at her for the last time, as if he knew that despite everything, he was no longer alone. And perhaps in the end, that was the greatest miracle. Now I ask you, how do you see the importance of emotional bonds in overcoming challenges? Have you ever had a time when connecting with someone or something was what helped you move forward? Share your story in the comments. And if you were moved, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any part of this exciting journey. Let's continue together, because true transformation begins the moment we allow ourselves to connect from the heart.